We're ready.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I'm Regina Smith, Executive Director of the Harlem Business Alliance. Thank you. We're pleased to have you here this evening, and we are very pleased to have these esteemed panelists to share the information, their experiences with you, because there's a lot that you need to know, there's a lot that we need to know. And before we jump this off tonight, I want you to be aware that this legislation really hasn't been written in a way that creates true economic equity for Black people, for the most harmed people. And so we have a lot of work to do. The legislation has been written, but the regs are going to be developed. And we have to push, as most harmed people from communities like Harlem and other communities throughout New York State, to make certain that we aren't competing against people who weren't harmed for social equity activities. Okay? That's one thing. We also have to fight for funding, because our people need to be funded and they need to be educated. And that is what you call repairing the harm that has been done to us and to our communities for over 50 years. So thank you. Please take notes. Please go to our website, follow us, and we will be engaging you and asking for your support to push as hard as we absolutely must in order to create thousands across New York State, Black and Latinos, those who were harmed, to benefit from this legislation, to become thriving entrepreneurs who will turn around and hire people from our communities. That absolutely must happen here in New York. We are very clear that it hasn't happened anywhere else around the United States. Despite the legislation that has been written, it has not happened. It's not acceptable. This is supposed to be the most progressive state in the United States. It absolutely is not when it comes to Black people and other harmed people. It's got to stop. We need to make it happen. Let me introduce the moderator for this evening, Damian. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. How's everybody doing?
Great.
All right. This feels strange. We haven't done this in a room with people, I feel like, in a year and a half. It's been a long time. I was here 3 years ago, and we were having a totally different conversation when it came to cannabis. We were only really able to talk about hemp and CBD. Obviously, the situation has changed a bit since then. And so for today, I'm going to give you a little rundown of how this is going to work. For the next hour or so, it's going to be mostly us talking about a specific set of slides you're going to see up on the screen here about the supply chain of cannabis in New York and what we think it's going to happen, what might happen, what might not happen. It's going to be a lot of information. This is being recorded. It'll be on YouTube by tomorrow probably, so there's no need to scribble down a ton of notes. It's all being recorded. After the first hour, get your questions ready, because then we'll do 45 minutes of Q&A specific to what you guys might have come here to find out about if we didn't cover it. We will try and cover a lot of different elements of the MRTA and the cannabis supply chain generally, but we might miss some things. Also, I'd say if, as we're talking, and there's a term, an acronym we use that you don't know, raise your hands real quick and we'll straighten it out. There's no questions that we won't answer here. I mean, this is really to gather, to build information and community knowledge, and so we want to do that as transparently and clearly as possible. So if there's something that we're saying isn't making sense, raise your hand. But for the actual questions, the substantive questions, we'll save that for the second hour. So I want to thank Harlem Business Association for having us, for hosting us. This is an important conversation. They've been hosting a lot of these conversations for the last few years, and they've been doing amazing work. Regina and her whole team have been doing amazing work, pushing for, justice in racial equity and social equity in this bill. And like she said, the bill doesn't go far enough, but it definitely went further than any other state in the country so far, and that's going to come out in this conversation. That the opportunities that we're going to talk about are real and plentiful, whether it be an actual permit or in the ancillary space. So we're going to cover all that. As far as my background, in case for those of you who don't know me, I did hemp in New York State. I did CBD in the Hudson Valley. I've been working in cannabis and hemp for 4 years now. I lived here in Harlem for 3 years. This is easily the best neighborhood in New York City. And I'm really glad that the first time we're doing this workshop and we're bringing this workshop to the city is in Harlem. And so it had to start here. And I think what we're going to talk about today, we're going to try and talk specifically about the opportunities that Harlem might see in the legal industry, and so we're going to tailor it as close to that as possible as the opportunities facing Upper Manhattan generally. So I'm going to let the panel introduce themselves. Take a few minutes to introduce yourselves, talk about your background in the space, and then we'll get started. And I'll start with you, John.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm too also born and bred in Harlem. I see Regina's shirt back there. I got introduced, I actually stepped into the cannabis space back in 2014 when I was working for Governor Cuomo in economic development. I did a lot of the reconnaissance and research on the medical program and the hemp program before it got started. So I traveled out to Colorado, Washington, and some of the other places that already legalized cannabis to do a lot of studying on what went right and what went wrong, and brought it back to the state. I don't know what they did with that. But anyway, it's from there I moved on to start a vertical hemp business in the Hudson Valley. Like Damian, I connected with the Rockefeller family and worked for 4 years with them, building a business where we grew maybe 50 to 100 acres of hemp, extracted it on site with a ethanol extraction process. We can get into that later, probably. And then we sold wholesale and retail CBD. Now I've since left and started my own farm and CBD products business where I consult with clients on making CBD product lines, specialized CBD products, and also specialized growth strain operations. And I have some products over there later if you guys want to take a look at it. So that's my quick introduction.
Owen?
Cool. I'm Owen Martinetti. My background started in 2017 in the cannabis space. I was a college student, and at the time, Cuomo opened up the New York Hemp Initiative program. Me and my friends in school, my roommates, we started researching what was this all about, because at the time I had no idea what CBD was, but I knew about industrial hemp. This turned into months of research. Eventually we applied for both an extraction and cultivation license and got approved as one of the first 5 extraction facilities back in 2017, and a farm in 2017 as well. We went on to start, pretty similar to John, a business up in Hoosick Falls in Berlin. It's about 45 minutes northeast of Albany, and we grew about 30 acres of hemp outside. We set up an extraction facility where our goal was to use CO2 extraction to create like the highest quality bulk extracts in the Northeast. And essentially these bulk extracts were the raw ingredients for other brands to make their product. I did that for about 3 years. And then I left to start other ventures. One of those is called Potency. That's a recreational dispensary opening up in Massachusetts in the next 3 months. Been working on that for 3 months. And then another venture that we worked on, navigating a complex supply chain, was just during COVID. Things slowed down with hemp for a lot of us up here and a lot of people in the industry, and got involved with working with different state agencies to import 3-ply masks into the country, and supplied Tennessee, New Mexico, Kentucky, Connecticut, and one other state with hand sanitizer and masks during COVID to keep busy. But so I have a background in different areas of the cannabis supply chain and other complex supply chains, and hopefully I can give you some insight onto different areas of both the recreational and the hemp side of cannabis.
Thank you.
So yeah, my name is Kaelan Castetter. I was born in the cannabis industry. My dad started the first hemp-infused wine in America in Binghamton, New York in 1997. He also grew a lot of cannabis, something that I wasn't fully aware of growing up necessarily. And so when I was a sophomore in college, I decided to get the bright idea to restart a wine company as a 19-year-old. So we did. We actually got the first New York State label approval for a wine product in state liquor authority history. Went against the federal government there, and we were the first licensed hemp processor in the state, just out of a little kind of shop in right outside Binghamton. And from there, saw a lot of opportunities in the space to bring information and you know, our knowledge of growing cannabis. Grew a lot of hemp at scale. The hemp marketplace, you know, really commodified and crashed pretty hard. You know, from there we pivoted into a lot of different things, you know, manufacturing of finished goods, you know, really helping brands develop. And then, you know, throughout all of this, a company called Castetter Cannabis Group, and that's really my main passion, what we do a lot of, which is really just bringing information and democratizing information to people who understand the industry, people, entrepreneurs that are mission driven, small business, minority entrepreneurs. We do a lot of low bono, pro bono consulting work, and then a lot of consulting work for people who can afford it, and you know, we charge a lot for our time, information. And we have a newsletter that goes out every week. I do a podcast where I bring a lot of entrepreneurs, specifically New York. I'm a very big on New York, and you know, New York centric for sure. I think that this is, you know, I mean, this is where, you know, cannabis comes from. This is the reason, you know, right here is why it was illegal in the first place. And this is also where the mecca of, you know, cannabis culture, no matter, you know, what happens in California and Colorado. And so I'm really excited about some of the promises and opportunities that could happen here. But you know, as the executive director was saying, you know, the bill doesn't necessarily go far enough, and it's also very vague. So, you know, the regulations, you know, are going to be very important. And so I also serve as the vice chair of the New York Cannabis Growers and Processors Association and chair of the policy committee. And one thing I really try to do is bring the needs of people in the, what we call legacy market, informal market, the only market that really exists in New York, and understand how to get them licenses and get them in the industry, and you know, really make this you know, the hub of cannabis for the world. So, you know, a lot of lofty goals, you know, but we also you know, back it up with a lot of cool stuff. So I'm really excited to be here. I speak on a lot of panels and stuff, but it's probably one of my more, you know, anticipated events come to also. Like, it's been like a year since being in front of people. So you know, thank you everybody for having me.
Thank you. Hey, how's everybody doing? My name is Cadmo. Thank you once again for having me as well. I don't have an extensive rap sheet as these gentlemen here, but you know, like the way I like to look at it is I got my foot into the door, and that's really what I'm here to, you know, portray and explain, right? And so I own Bodega Inc. Along with my partners. We do branding and concept development all the way from the beginning stages to final product. So anything from packaging, labeling, you know, even just your websites, the labels. I mean, he right here is one of our clients. We're just wrapping up his big rebrand as well. You know, and for me, growing up in the Bronx, I'm a Bronx native, and it was always a pipe dream to work in cannabis because people that look like me and majority of everybody here are always targeted. I've been targeted for it many times, and so I always wanted to try to figure out, as a serial entrepreneur, as my mom likes to call me, a way to get my foot into the door without having to take so many legal risks, and then through there trying to then develop the relationships to get in further into, you know, the different types of licensing and, you know, distribution and on-site consumption and all the different ways that you're able to get involved. So I started the ancillary business, which is you know, just a way to be able to get into the industry without having to worry about so much capital, licensing, or just really a lot of the headaches that I'm sure these gentlemen deal with on a day-to-day, but while still being able to be involved into the industry. So, yeah.
Thank you. Perfect. Let's hear it for him. And this panel was really selected because we kind of covered it all here. We've got cultivation, dispensaries, you know, some of the macro level stuff that Kaelan could talk about New York generally, and then ancillary industries. You know, there are going to be ways to get into cannabis without actually getting into cannabis. That's a huge opportunity that I feel isn't, you know, discussed enough in New York, but we're going to get into all that. So to start, I'm going to figure, if I can use this, here we go. That's Linda on the left there. She's my business partner. That's her harvesting beautiful hemp plant. So what we are going to talk about here today, this is just kind of lay out the framework for this discussion. So we're going to be talking about cannabis generally as a commodity crop. We're going to try and understand it within a commodity market and how it moves, how it's going to move throughout the supply chain, where the money's going to be made, you know, where it's going to be risky, where it's going to be less risky. but we're going to look at it objectively in that capacity. You know, there's not going to be a lot of discussion about cannabinoids or the cultural power of cannabis. That's a separate conversation. We're also going to talk about accessibility. So we're going to talk about where it makes sense and where it's worth pursuing, you know, market entry, and where, you know, the highest barriers to entry might make it less, you know, pursuable in the first year, but still important to understand. We're also going to talk about where Harlem fits in. So we're going to try and always bring it back to Harlem and the Upper Manhattan and discuss, you know, where specialization can happen around cannabis that Harlem can really take advantage of. And lastly, available resources. So a number of you came up earlier and talked about your existing businesses, and really what we want to focus on here is how to pivot what you're good at right now into cannabis and make it practical and realizable. And so what we're not going to talk about, we don't have time to talk about all this stuff, and some of this stuff we can't talk about because we literally don't know. How to apply for a license, the rules and regs, you know, I don't know what the timeline looks like now. A lot of us thought earlier it would be October of this year we'd see the rules and regulations, but it's moving a lot slower, so it's probably last final quarter of this year, more like December, November, bleeding into next year, but we don't know the rules and regs, we don't know how to apply, we can't tell you how to get ready to apply. There's obviously some elements of how to get ready now, but it would be disingenuous to say that we're gonna be able to really explain that here today. Yeah, what you need to apply for a license, the marketing of products, marketing and branding is, you know, a whole other topic of cannabis that we also can't speak to yet without the rules and regs. We don't know how friendly they'll be to the ability to brand and market your products. Finance, access to capital, huge barrier to entry in this market. As we all know, that is a whole separate beast that we need to tackle. And so, you know, for the purposes of this conversation, obviously that'll be an element of it, but we can't fully focus on it like we would need to. Lobbying efforts and, you know, general, you know, activism, we're not going to touch that today, but, you know, like Regina was saying at the beginning, like this is something that happens in tandem with this conversation. The activism, you know, pushing state legislators to make these rules and regs as fair and just as possible is something that we need to all be committed to while we're actively trying to understand what's coming down the pipeline. We don't want to focus on one or the other exclusively because then we're caught flat-footed when they actually legalize, and you know, or we don't have our voice in the room as they're writing the rules and regulations. We need to be doing both at the same time. And so for the purposes of this conversation, this is a supply chain, you know, business development panel discussion. And we're going to kick it off. And yeah, again, it's timeline. This is about 45 minutes to an hour, this conversation, and then save your questions for the end. The people watching on the live stream, also, if you type your questions in to the chat, we'll get to those in the back as well when we start answering questions. So, what is unique about the New York market? A couple things, I'll start and then I'll turn to the panel, but you know, one is that people in New York City do not have problems finding cannabis. A lot of studies show that New York City is one of the highest consuming cannabis places in the world. The market's there. It's not going to be hard to do customer acquisition with this market once it's established. And market maturity. People in New York also know what they like to smoke, and they demand high quality products. Generally, we can assume that because you know they've had access to high quality products for a long time in the black market, legacy market. Tourism is going to be a huge element. Pre-pandemic, you know, New York City got 65 million people visiting a year. Compare that to Amsterdam, which has had a legal market and a lot of cannabis tourism. You know, they got 20 million in tourists a year. So that is going to be a huge opportunity. If you can picture a dispensary in what is it? Midtown, Times Square. I never go there. But it's going to be the ugliest dispensary ever. But a dispensary in Times Square is going to get a ton of foot traffic. Lastly, next is the MRTA. As it exists, you know, it is an innovative piece of legislation. They put a lot of things in there, and some of the things they put in there we might not see for a few years, but the fact that they're in there is encouraging that they're taking it seriously. And so one of those things is on-site consumption, cannabis events, you know, hookah lounges, like Amsterdam coffee shop type places. You know, the micro business, we're going to get into that as well. The micro business permit is a huge thing. And again, the social equity provisions. You know, as we do these workshops, you know, this is our first one and we plan on doing another one fairly soon in the Bronx. You know, social equity provisions. We cannot speak to exactly who they're going to be giving those to because they literally capture 75% of the New York State population. There's a lot of people in there, but the fact that they have, written that into the legislation is encouraging, and it's still in our interest to at least prepare and assume that a lot of those are going to go to Black and brown communities and businesses in the city of Manhattan and Bronx and Brooklyn. So, yeah. And so upstate versus New York City. I mean, what we're going to see here too as we talk about the supply chain, we're going to talk about how New York State and the geography of New York State and the microeconomies of New York State are going to influence how this market develops. And so it's really important when you think about cannabis to know that this is New York to New York. Everything is going to happen in New York. Connecticut's not involved, New Jersey's not involved. Everyone who gets a permit lives in New York. Every business is licensed in New York. That's never happened in a commodity market before. Wine, vegetables, whatever. New Yorkers don't have to work. The city doesn't have to work with upstate in other industries. And so this is really gonna force a lot of conversations and a lot of business relationships that didn't exist before. And which is why we do have representation on this panel from upstate, people who come from cultivation backgrounds, upstate, farming country. And so those communities are gonna have to engage a lot more with these communities to form mutually beneficial relationships. And so, having said that, I'm going to turn it over to the panel. Start with you, John. What jumps out to you about New York State, and generally that might make the supply chain and cannabis generally unique to the rest of the country.
Well, you have a really, really good list there, to be honest. But I would say the density of New York City is very important. And also, if you're thinking of how to get Black and brown people into the industry, this is the biggest concentration in the United States of Black people here. Probably 2 million in New York State, I think. So those are some other characteristics. But you have everything else. The infrastructure here. So you have banks. You have highways. You have transportation systems. You have some, lot of tech companies here. So there's a lot of intellectual capital in New York City close by that you can take advantage of. I mean, other states like Colorado have been very successful, of course. Colorado's 5 million people. They did a couple $2 billion a year last year. I mean, it's 5 million people in the Bronx, in Queens and Brooklyn alone. So, the density and the velocity of money and knowledge is very important. It's very prevalent here.
I think what I would add on to that would be that there's a lot of infrastructure already here from the hemp side of things, and for people that are just starting to learn about the cannabis industry, going and seeing these facilities and asking questions. This wasn't something a lot of states had when recreational started, so we probably have at least 12 to 18 months before the recreational market comes online. This would be a great time to start reaching out to farms that are already growing hemp, people that are already extracting CBD, and starting to learn more about the supply chains, because a lot of those characters will be in the cannabis industry also. So it could be a business relationship. It also could be a educational one. States like Massachusetts didn't have that, for instance, and so the curve to get things to market took a very long time in the beginning. And I think that's something that New York has going for it right now, is that we might be able to see a jump start a lot quicker than some of these other states like New Jersey and Connecticut that will be a lot slower to roll out their programs. So I would strongly suggest reaching out to us after this presentation, reaching out to other farms and just networking. If you're serious about getting into this industry, there's lots of people that are out there to help and educate right now. So that's what I can say about New York.
Cool.
Yeah, so I would say the same thing I say to anyone asking this question: culture, right? New York is a trendsetter on almost anything, worldwide. And so when you think about cannabis and how what happens in New York gets, picked up throughout the country and throughout the world, there's going to be a global industry at some point, right? I mean, it's going to be a national industry. Schumer introduced the bill. Even if it doesn't pass for the next 35 years, it's going to eventually get done, right? And so we have a opportunity to become the nexus of the brands and the products that are going to be purchased throughout the world, right? But there's also a risk that they just take the ideas that we come up with here, and they just, in these large MSOs and these large cannabis companies, just take that and they just, accumulate their wealth. I mean, they don't need more money, the people that own these companies, but small business owners in New York do, right? Throughout the state, right? Through upstate, downstate, everywhere. And so I think it's a huge opportunity. And then also the intersection between like music and cannabis, specifically music, by Black artists in cannabis too. I think, this presents all these opportunities that other states, no matter how much experience they have growing cannabis, whatever, they don't have that, they don't understand it. And so I think there's a huge leg up and a huge advantage for entrepreneurs right here in New York.
So New York as a state, as a city, and I mean, look at Harlem, right, is very creative. And so sticking to what I know within this industry is there's going to be so many opportunities for people that don't know how to get into the industry, don't have the funds to get into the industry, or even have the time to get into the industry, because they already have their own niche established, to be able to take cannabis and integrate it into it. And similar to how he was saying, this is a trend-setting state, it's a trend-setting city. I mean, even just Harlem itself, look at the Apollo. I mean, you're going to have a lot of opportunities to really learn how to take it and push it to any other place, and it's just going to be the creativity that's going to come out of here. It's going to be unmatched. And I mean, just like any other industry, there's going to be a saturation of products, and there's going to be a saturation of ideas, and so we're going to be able to focus on creating what actually stands out. And I think that New York and places like Harlem are where that's really going to come out of. So that's my pleasure.
I was just saying, have you guys already seen the language around cannabis has shifted, well, just to talk about it, shift already from the West Coast to the East Coast, right? California's done, Colorado, we all know that, and I'm not disparaging them or anything, but everybody knows that the dialogue around cannabis in New York, in North America, is already in the East Coast, particularly in New York. So it's already, the flavor's already moving this way. And if you combine New York with New Jersey, which is legal, and then Pennsylvania, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania's coming. That's like 45 million addressable. It's an addressable market. It's pretty huge. Tons of money here. So the dialogue is shifting away from the West Coast to the East Coast, and this is where it's going to happen here.
License types. We got a lot on there. The MRTA is a long piece of legislation, but they actually don't spend much time detailing each individual permit you see up here. I encourage a lot of people to check out New York Hemp Lab's analysis of the MRTA. They spend about an hour on each permit. Their YouTube videos are up, and they go into depth about every word, every sentence about these permits, but there's, in some of these permits, there's only a paragraph of writing. So the rules and regulations are really going to shape what these things end up looking like. And again, why getting in people's ears in Albany right now is very important. But Kaelan, could you tell me, in your opinion, what licenses here roll out first and which ones are kind of saved for later?
Yeah, so that's interesting. So, I mean, when you think of it from a complete self-interest perspective as a regulator, right, they're going to want to get tax revenue in the door as quickly as possible. So tax revenue comes from two places: cultivation side, which is the excise tax, and then also on the retail side, right? So, processing, the state, if they're looking at, all right, how can we get a marketplace set up very easily, there's enough, probably processors, manufacturers on the hemp side to at least get things going right away, right? There isn't much cultivation infrastructure, right? So they're going to want to, issue maybe 100, 200 cultivation licenses at least, decently soon, and then retail, right? I mean, I think retail is really where they're going to want to license and be kind of aggressive about licensing. So I do see, retail being, first. But one thing that's not on this list is the special use permits too, which I think are really interesting because those aren't going to be competitive. And so that's like trucking, warehouse permit. There's a catering permit on there, which is really interesting. I also think, I hope that they license the on-site consumption licenses quickly. And also one thing that I mentioned, you don't need to, retail dispensary and on-site consumption license, they're not going to compete with each other, right? So you can license a lot of those. So yeah, I do think that, retail is going to be, but also I think they're going to issue distributor licenses, off the bat too. these micro businesses, I think there's going to be a desire to issue enough of them, right? Because there is this mandate. Fortunately, Majority Leader Crystal Peoples-Stokes, really ran this bill, and this is really her baby, and her, is a legacy issue for her. So I think she's really going to keep their feet to the fire to make sure, this goal of 50% social equity licenses, as you said, 75% of the state or whatever, can qualify as that. So I do think they're going to be a desire to issue a good amount of, social equity licenses, and I think they're going to look at the micro businesses too for that. So.
As recipients of that, yeah. Cooperative licensing, do you see that coming online anytime soon, or?
Well, that's a really interesting and complicated license, right? Because you have to have joint ownership and joint control, right? So you have to follow, I think it's the 7 principles of a cooperative, right? So, I've heard some ideas on that, and it just seems very, very complicated to me, right? So I think that the cooperative license might take the longest to roll out. I also think delivery, just because of maybe the politics around it, might take a little bit too, but there's been a lot of discussions around delivery being a low barrier, which I'm not really sure if that's necessarily the case, but there might be, a limited rollout on delivery licenses there, and then they're going to have to license labs. So lab testing, I mean, they have to, right? Because they're going to collect taxes based on THC. And we'll see how that works, but they're going to have to test it, right? So, yeah.
So we're going to jump right into the supply chain. We got a nifty little graph here. So this is going to frame a lot of the conversation we're about to have in terms of the supply chain, the vertical integration. So ROs, the legacy medical cannabis companies, what are there, 5 that are counted? How many companies? 10. Oh wow. There is going to be a separate category for them that allows them to be vertically integrated, and micro business alongside them will be vertically integrated. The rest of us have that mess on the right there. And so what I want people to understand is that this isn't, that there's a lot of interest groups that have resulted in what we're looking at, this mess. There's a lot of different interests that they're trying to balance out with what they've created here. But what we have on the right is a complete lack of vertical integration. So cultivators cannot sell directly to customers. This is all very intentional. I hope by the end of this conversation, you guys will see why, the intention behind what they've done with the, segmented market. It definitely is going to lead to a more inefficient system, but it's also going to lead to a small business level playing field in the first 3 to 5 years, ideally. And so, first and foremost, the lack of vertical integration is why understanding the entire supply chain is so critical. Because you're going to be, if you do get a permit in this state, you're going to be just running your business. You're not going to see the big picture. So understanding the big picture before you can jump into that business is huge.
Damian?
Sorry.
What do you mean by vertical integration?
Yeah, so ROs basically can do everything. They can cultivate, they can then process it into a product, they can then distribute it directly to their dispensary and deliver it out to a customer. So they capture every single profit margin that would exist in that business. And so their margins are going to be 60% compared to a single cultivator or nursery, which would probably be more like 30 to 40, 20%. But this is the profitable business, this is the big business. And so when you see states that have allowed for vertical integration or even mandated vertical integration, like I think Illinois is one of them, that really...
Well, New York mandates vertical integration on the medical side.
On the medical side, yeah.
Yep.
So that only lets someone who's got $5 million jump into cannabis, because you've got to build all that. You have to know how to do all that. You can't just start a nursery. You can't just become like a small tabletop processor. So when you start with vertical integration and you kind of bake that into your industry, you're talking about the big players are the only players that can actually enter it. I think this will be a good place to start. Can we loosely define what kind of square footage canopy space we're talking about when we talk about RO versus a micro business?
If they had their way, it's 250,000, a million square feet, right? But I think that you see somewhere around 100,000, maybe 200,000 square feet, which is a huge grow. I mean, it is really a huge grow. But you do see it in other states. I was looking, the largest footprint in the country is like 3 million square feet, or something like that. But
where is that?
It's in California. Yeah, I think it's like greenhouse. I just quick Googled it the other day. Largest cultivators in the country.
And they don't have limits on canopy square footage in California?
No, but I do think it's part of the licensing. But I don't think they do it this way. Like the state on the square footage side, they're kind of working backwards, right? So they're saying, okay, this much square foot equals this much production, which is a very difficult thing that everyone has very different results, when they're growing. So, but then they're going to say, okay, well, the market is only going to require 2 million pounds, right? And so therefore, let's license 2 million pounds worth of square footage, right? To kind of create this like artificial, supply, supply restriction, right? So the ROs, they're going to have, I think a lot of regulators are looking at that like 100,000 to 200,000 square feet, but one RO just bought 1 million square feet in Long Island, so obviously they're looking at it differently than the rest of us.
Well, Columbia Care, right?
Columbia Care.
I think I don't know, I cannot speak for them, but my thinking is they're not going to grow all that themselves. They'll make it available to small and medium-sized businesses who need the capacity and don't want to set up their own business, which is smart too, because then they can eat horizontally now as well. It's an interesting development. But the ROs look like they do have a advantage in the marketplace, and they do. But they're going to get theirs anyway. You knew that was going to happen. But they're still vulnerable because once they get so big, they can't innovate as well. They can't create as well. And that's where, some of us can come into the market and some of you with new strains, interesting marketing ideas, different products, and capturing different markets as well. Some of these ROs are not going to be able to talk to the black community directly because they, you just look at their board, right? So, that's just how it is. So there are opportunities to get in with what you do, but you got to get in and figure and get the business established.
Well, I think that's an important point too, because we talk about profitability. None of the major MSOs are profitable.
Yeah.
You look at their balance sheet on a quarterly basis; they're all losing a mass amount of money because it's really a scheme, right? It's a scheme to just add value into these companies, these billion-dollar valuations. I've sat in a lot of meetings with people who run, these companies, right? They don't know one thing about cannabis. They're very arrogant about what they think they know and what they don't know. And then when they fail spectacularly, they still have a job, obviously. And me personally, I think if you allow entrepreneurs to compete, there is entrepreneurs sitting in this room, I guarantee, not meeting any of you guys, that are more capable than the CEOs of the companies that are running on that RO side. I wouldn't feel any sort, they're going to have their, footprint, etc., but that doesn't mean that people are going to go buy bud from them, right? And
they weren't even able to sell bud also. For a long
for
time.
flower, exactly, yeah.
For a long time.
And the places they can, they're throwing it away. In Canada, they're throwing half their crop away. So, yeah.
And they were limited to 20 dispensaries.
And then four
statewide.
adult use, right?
Yeah, and 3 or 4 for adult use. So, they have some limits, some constraints on them as well. Also, the state didn't really market the medical program early on, so people still don't know what cannabis is.
Could you refrain from the acronyms? Because some people don't know what the RO means.
Oh, yeah. It's a registered organization.
Registered organization. These are the 10 companies, large companies that have been in New York State, and they have medical cannabis licenses. And so they have been bleeding money for several years now. And so a lot of the idea behind this, vertically integrated license just for them is to make back some of the money that they've already invested in New York State.
Well, and so 9 out of 10 of them are not based in New York. There's only one Etain that's a New York business, exactly. And they also so the idea, and I haven't heard this in a while actually, is interesting. But from the beginning it was, we're going to make them pay $20 million for the privilege of selling adult use from a vertical integration, and we're going to put that into a fund, right, for these low interest or grants or no interest grants or low interest loans to social equity applicants, right? Now I haven't heard this come back up in a few months, but I think that was the idea, or some sort of auction, for them to pay for this privilege, because it really is a privilege that we're allowing them to be vertically integrated. Micro business can be vertically integrated, but you're capped at selling your own products in 2,000 square feet or whatever it's going to be.
Yeah.
So,
and so you guys can picture this. The micro business permit, it's designed for social equity applicants. It's a gift of vertical integration to the communities that deserve to build businesses and be profitable, right off the bat. But, that's a heavy lift. That's growing, processing, distributing. It's everything. And so are there a lot of social equity applicants in New York State, from New York City, that have the experience to start that up, let alone the capital? So it's good that it's there, and I want people to appreciate that. They did put that in there for social equity applicants, but it's nowhere near as, you know, critical to what's about to happen as the vertical integration that the ROs have. And so, you know, I do want to contrast that with, you know, vertical integration is one thing, and it has a ton of advantages. When you're not vertically integrated, the opposite of that is specialization. It's, you know, you find your niche in that mess right there, and you do it better than anybody else. And I think that's what we want to come out of this conversation today, is that there is a ton of opportunity on that side. And more to the point, you New Yorkers walk into a dispensary, they are going to ask who grew what and where it came from. They're going to know who grew it, they're going to know how they grew it, they're going to know if that person is from New York. They're going to have a lot of what people are curious and they care about their products, and in cannabis they care even more. And so I think that, you know, the ROs will have, you know, a huge leg up, and they will make probably a good return on their investment that they put in so far. But, you know, long term, you're thinking about, you know, a small business, people are going to want to buy your stuff if you're, you know, a genuine representation of the city and the state.
Yeah, I could echo that point, which is over in Massachusetts, like what we've seen is, you know, we're opening up our dispensary in the Berkshires, so it's on the border of New York and Vermont, and people gravitate towards like local craft stuff, and they don't really want anything that's coming from like the east side of Massachusetts. So I think that's a great point. And over the years, also back to what Kaelan was saying before about vertically integrating in these multi-state operators, is despite the amount of money they might have, specializing in something like cultivation is extremely difficult to do. So even like if you have tons of money, you still get it wrong. Like the feedback from a lot of dispensaries that I've spoken to in Massachusetts is a lot of people don't want some of those, you know, these actors, their products, because they just lack quality control, because they've gotten so big, they don't have the ability that a small 10,000, 20,000 grow could do. And it really makes a difference, and it really, when I say makes a difference, it's really when it comes down to quality and sell-through, and people really want that stuff.
I feel like this is where it brings it back to what I had mentioned earlier about letting people from our communities actually have the opportunities to, you know, not only work in cannabis, but, you know, not necessarily have to be in cannabis to work there, you know. I didn't mention earlier, so my background is actually in culinary arts, and I had a restaurant and a bar prior to working in design, and I did concept development for hospitality industry. So I've opened up restaurants, helped open up here in New York State, Dykeman, I'm Dominican, and as well as outside of the country in Panama and Dominican Republic. And I shifted towards this with design and printing and manufacturing of concepts for this kind of industry and for cannabis specifically, when I started seeing that the need for it was increasing. But that didn't mean that the need for the on-site consumption or the culinary aspect, you know, drinks and so on and so forth diminished. And I know there's a lot of people that are entrepreneurs and creators in these industries that will now be able to take it and find their niche within that mess without having to worry about the mess of everything else. Because sure, in a straight line, the ROs and the micro businesses and the vertical integration is great, but if you can just focus on something, you know, you'll be able to do a lot more with it, you know. And so I think that's where really is going to be a lot of opportunities, you know, for people of color and people from our communities to actually be able to be integrated with this.
So the first part of the supply chain we're going to go over really quickly, because I kind of front-loaded this in a way. This is probably the one that's least applicable to Harlem. These are nurseries, and so towards the end you're going to see the last one we're going to talk about is dispensaries and delivery, and we're going to talk about ones that are specific to Harlem towards the end, and we're going to talk about them more at length. But for this one, you know, I really just want, you know, to do a quick rundown of what nurseries are going to look like. These are pretty stable, reliable businesses in mature cannabis markets. You know, you have 10,000 square foot greenhouse. You pump out, you know, maybe 1,000 plants a day that you then sell for $1 each to different grows. And these are, you know, clones or seeds. They're just little baby plants like that. You have very predictable revenue. You know, you have bigger grow clients. You know, for a lot of people, you know, who are interested in touching the plant and working with the plant, this is a lot cheaper, and there's a lower barrier entry in the nursery side than there is on like the cultivation side. I don't know if you guys want to just add anything about nurseries and what they might look like in New York State.
Well, Well, I do know the trick to being successful in this thing, your seed has to have tremendous yield. When we first started in the business, we were doing hemp seeds, and I don't know where we got it, but the yield was like 85% or something like that, and that really eats into your margins. The yield meaning successful plants go to maturity. So your game's got to be really good here on the yield, and also what other thing, and come up with unique interesting strains. I mean, if you're gonna sell cherry, whatever, everybody sells that. That may be good for you, but trying to be innovative on the type of seed is important, and it takes a while to get. It could take 2-3 generations to get really good seed and good clones as well. So I think it's an excellent business to be in because no one else is going to do it. But it's not easy.
There is one element I do want to bring up about nurseries. Nurseries are also going to be selling directly to people at dispensaries who are doing home grow.
Yeah.
And so home grow is in the bill.
Yep.
Within 18 months of the first grow license, dispensary license being delivered, we will all be able to grow plants at home. We have to buy those from somewhere. Nurseries in the city are going to sell them to us, and so you might one day be walking into a midtown, Harlem shop and buy one of these plants for $40, and that's your cannabis. You're going to grow all your cannabis you need probably for the year. One of those plants, but
the retail market for genetics is going to be huge.
Genetics.
I mean, it already kind of is, So, but I think what's really interesting about genetics when it comes to cannabis is it is the brand, it is the product, right? So, for instance, in New York, I mean, the most popular strain is sour diesel, right? Sour. I mean, New York sour is everything, and so when you think about what people want, it really comes down to the strain, right? And I think now you're starting to see people kind of build brands around the strains and build brands around, what's coming out. But, whether you're in this business or not, you really do want to have a lot of connection to the genetics, right? I mean, you look at Cookies. So Cookies is the most successful, minority-owned business in the cannabis industry, right? And they're probably, honestly, one of the more successful businesses in the cannabis industry. They're not publicly traded, but their whole thing is genetics. It's all genetics play, and it's really just the different strains, and bringing celebrities in on the strains, and having their shops and selling all those products. So this is going to be really important, no matter where you are in the supply chain, to pay a lot of attention to this.
Just one other thing on the nurseries and on Cookies is Cookies just came to Massachusetts, and what we've noticed is it's selling out in the stores. But it's interesting to see because it's not clear if they're actually cultivating in the state or if they're partnering with cultivators there. So that might be a thing here where if someone starts nurseries, they can branch out and start expanding to other states with their genetics, because just that name Cookies with the seeds in a different state could go a long way. But yeah, they're doing really well in Massachusetts now.
So the next part of the supply chain we're gonna go through quickly here is the cultivators and craft growers. And so craft growers, your cultivators are what, 40,000, 30,000 square foot facilities, $1 million facilities that are growing a ton of cannabis. Craft growers might be in a 2,000 square foot, room, potentially an outdoor grow. We don't know if that's going to be allowed yet, but
open.
Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit about, I want to make it known the barriers to entry on the cultivation side are significant. There's a lot more risk here. And I kind of want to emphasize that because there's a lot of assumptions that I've heard of in New York that, if you're not growing the plant, you're not making the money. Growing the plant is probably the hardest part of the whole business. It's the least, thing you can pick up quickly and just get into. I tried to do that, lost a lot of money in South Carolina growing 20 acres of hemp. So you also see a ton of people going into it. And so in a lot of mature markets, it's saturated. There's a ton of people growing. I think that's because, people are, it's fun as hell. It's the funnest part of probably the business, but it's also the most challenging and the riskiest. And so one way to think about the cultivation and the way it's going to work in New York is, are we going to be able to grow enough for New Yorkers? Since the demand is already there and significant, and I think they estimated 4 million square feet of canopy space is what New York is going to consume a year. We don't currently have the growing capacity to even to touch that number. There's not experienced growers here. I mean, they will start coming here and they will start learning a little bit more, but scaling up to that level right now, on the cultivation side, is just the talent's not there, the infrastructure's not there. So I'll throw this to the panel. What kind of distinctions would you make about craft growing and large-scale cultivating and the way it exists in the permit structure in New York?
Yeah, I mean, I think the idea that it's a high barrier is exactly right, and you got to give yourself time to fail. You're going to fail on so many crops before you get it right. Because there's so many different issues, right? Like you can grow good crop, have a great grow room, and then get powdery mildew, and it's insidious, right? It's so hard to get powdery mildew out of a grow, and that's just one issue. I mean, there's all these other pathogens and pests that you have to deal with, and then creating a quality product. I mean, I think with cannabis is it's not going to tell you something's wrong until it's too late. Right? I mean, if you ever had a garden and you had that experience, you're like, you didn't realize something was wrong, and then it's all gone, right? So, you go away for a weekend and your grow's gone. You know what I mean? Like, so there's a lot of failure there, and there is a lot of money to invest, and then also it's most susceptible to commodification and price changes, right? I mean, your costs are pretty fixed, right? I mean, your energy is your largest cost of goods sold, and it's probably going to cost you around $300 to $400 a pound to produce. It's going to cost a lot to some of the most important part of cultivation is actually after it's done and the drying and the curing process, because that's what really creates the quality differences. And so, the price, as it pushes down, and plus you have a tax that you have to pay as a cultivator, this THC tax. As the price pushes down, your margins shrink, and then it could spring back up, right? I mean, you see this in states, happen all the time. I mean, you see it in New York. I mean, just on like the informal market, right? I mean, the price of a pound can go down to like $1,200, and right now it's really high, so it can go up to $2,500, $3,000 or more, right? And when you don't go to the consumer directly, you can't build a brand around it, because if you're a cultivator, you really need to build a brand around it so we can build a customer base that's always going to buy it. You can get pushed off the shelf. I experienced that when I was in the wine industry, right? I mean, there's just so much competition on the shelf, and then a lot of times it can go pay to play, and then you have to worry about a distributor and they're taking your margin. So it is a difficult business. But that being said, no matter what we say, if you're growing cannabis for the first 2, 3, 4 years, you're going to make a lot of money.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you're growing it well, if you're successfully growing it, yeah.
Even if you're just growing it, I mean, honest, just because of the undersupply.
Yep.
But then then that will correct.
Correct. Yeah. So the first 4 years for sure. Can you speak? Go ahead. Sorry.
I can't stress the importance enough of how risky the growing side is. Of it takes about 90 days, and sometimes give or take 15 days. And at any point during that, there could be some sort of failure in a grow room. And that grow room, let's say you're at a 10,000 square foot facility, one of your rooms could be 300 plants, and each plant could be producing you about, let's just say 100 pounds per room. And that room, as Kaelan was saying, was $2,000 to $4,000 a pound. So that whole room's $200,000 to $400,000. And if something goes wrong, that's gone completely. There's no salvaging that. And so it's definitely the riskiest of all the license types, in my opinion. But yeah, just wanted to make sure that that's very clear, because it's, I've grown, a few of us have grown here. We did outdoor, which New York State's not sure if they're going to do outdoor yet. Certain states have entertained this. There's a lot less barriers to entry. Indoor cultivation is extremely expensive. It costs a 10,000 square foot facility could be north of $2.5 million, and that's on the small side of this type of operation. And so, outdoor cultivation, all you're really going to need is 2 acres of land is the equivalent of 100,000 square feet. So we'd like to see New York adopt an outdoor policy. I think it reduces the capital barrier to entry to get into cultivation. But what does come with outdoor is the elements of outside. Yeah. So there's a lot more risk growing outdoor versus indoor. However, it's cheaper to get involved. And so those are the things to weigh when looking at maybe one or the other as an adventure.
Yeah, I think they're going to allow outdoor. It would just make sense if, what?
You think they're going to allow outdoor?
Yeah. To diversify the market again, they're going to have to do it. Also, you don't want the countryside studded with lighted boxes all over, eating up energy. That's counterproductive to what even the cannabis business is about. Agriculture, the regenerative agriculture is about. And also, but So I mainly grow outdoor. Been growing outdoor the last 4 years. Now I do indoor, but outdoor. If you're going to do outdoor, you're going to have to. You have a security issue there too. So that adds costs. Because I think one of the farms in the group, in your group, the CPG or CGA, I think wants to grow an acre or two. So he's going to have to fence.
And I've seen it.
And it's like it's like a prison, right?
Yeah, fencing
Wait,
costs are crazy.
Yeah, we've seen this. There's one in Sheffield, Massachusetts. They're the maximum you can do, and they just have a giant fence around their property. It's in a residential community
Is that
too. No, it's it's with Ben Dobson.
Yeah, Theory. He grows for Theory.
Yeah, they're in
Ted-
Great Barrington.
Ted Dobson.
Ted Dobson, yeah.
Yeah.
But it's something to see, and then when
It's not even a fence. It's like a metal wall. It's
Oh, yeah.
It looks like a Game of Thrones or something.
yeah, it looks wild. And then you go inside, and it's a farm with hemp, with
Yeah.
cannabis plants. But lots of complaints from obviously people around because of the smell issues. But they have to have security at night when people are not working. So there are definitely security issues with it.
There's also only certain genetics you can grow too, right? You probably need more of an indica that finishes earlier, because our Septembers are just very. I mean, you can have a beautiful September, or I mean, if you get a few days of rain and then a freeze, frost. I mean, you're looking at bud rot and all these kind of things too. And then if the state imposes very strict quality standards, you might have a problem with tests and stuff. So I mean, really, the state needs to create two different set of standards depending on where the product's going.
Right. But each has their place because the outdoor one probably it's very difficult to get the same quality as the indoor. So each will have their place in the market. The outdoor will probably be extracted for infused products, and then the indoors will be packages like eighths and grams and go as like a shelf-ready product. So both sides will have their place in the market.
And some people only want sun-grown.
Yeah,
True.
I think sun-grown's the best. Think autoflowers. That'll help speed up the process. But
Yeah.
that's a whole nother discussion.
I want to quickly say that a lot of this probably goes over people's heads with the grow side. This is easily the hardest part of the business to understand. It took me years to figure some of it out. And I will say that, I got a plug program class I'll be teaching at Medgar Evers, their horticulture and cannabis class. They just started a cannabis minor in the fall. But there aren't any cannabis programs in any of the CUNY schools in the city right now. There's about 12 upstate. They've been upstate New York farming culture, cannabis farming culture. So this, divide between who knows how to grow and who doesn't know how to grow, it's going to widen. And I feel like what we're going to need to see is need to see some training programs move to the city, give people access to the plant touching activity so they can see it, they can learn how it grows, and so eventually they might be able to go upstate and start their own farms and stuff. But again, this industry is here to stay. This industry is going to be here for and it's going to be a New York only industry for the next 10, 20 years before the federal government legalizes it. So there will be time to learn how to grow this plant and potentially start a grow, but it's definitely not something that without much experience people would recommend you jump into.
Okay, I have a question and comment together. I want to go back to we mentioned Daryl together. This is my fault. You had mentioned that you had a pipe dream to be in the cannabis business.
Oh, me.
I thought that was funny.
No pun intended.
But the question I have is on the creative side. You guys are talking about all these problems that could happen, which is good. But now, what about the insurance industry? Can you get insurance for these things that you're talking about? Is that in place yet?
No.
Not for.
That's one question. The other part is, if you have a license, things are happening. Is there any restriction in you exporting some cannabis so you can continue to be in business? Those are my questions.
So as of now, I mean, you can't export cannabis outside of the state it was produced. Chuck Schumer came out yesterday, I believe, or the day before, with federal legalization language. And inside of that language, it did open up the pathway potentially for cannabis to be shipped across state lines of legal states. But we'll see when the final legislation is adopted. But as of now, you cannot. New York cannabis will have to stay in New York, just like any other state has to stay within their state for cannabis.
So if your growing procedure crashes, yours does not, you can get something from him and it'll be okay.
Inside of New
Inside
York,
the state.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but because there's no vertical integration, there's no benefit for you to buy and sell it, because now you're a distributor, and now you're not even allowed to be a distributor. So if your crop fails, there's really no recourse. There's no insurance. I mean, the best thing to do would be to, if you have 10,000 square foot, to have like, 5 rooms and different crops going at different times and kind of risk yourself out. That's really the only kind of insurance policy you can get.
An operational one.
Yeah, exactly.
From the point of view of somebody that is not as integrated as these gentlemen, right? So to kind of get a lot of the ideas for some of the cannabis brands that I work with and develop their brands, I like to actually go to their farms, and I've been fortunate enough to go to some different locations and experience and see their process to kind of get ideas. And so I have like an input on that from how many of you maybe this is something new, and it is a very difficult thing. Like how these gentlemen are saying it is something where it's great to know, and I would definitely recommend becoming knowledgeable on the growing, the cultivating, the distribution side of things, but don't get too immersed into it if that's not what you think your specialty is, from my point of view. Because at one point, I have a friend who actually has a farm in Michigan, and I've gone and visited them often, and I see his farm. I've gone several times, and I was there unfortunately one time where he lost his crop, and I mean the drain in his face is like, I don't know if I want to deal with that, and not that it's not a potential for profitability in the future. It's just definitely do your research and understand it, and go and experience it if you haven't, to see actually what it takes to do it, so that you're a little bit more knowledgeable before you say, all right, well, maybe this is how I want to integrate myself into the industry, just to kind of have a little bit more knowledge, not just by like hearing or reading what you see in the legislation.
Yeah, and it's not just like, you could have a quick little anecdote, because you can have all the knowledge in the world, right? But when I was growing up, my dad grew a lot of cannabis, and he fixed cars, right? And so growing cannabis was, how I get, my shoes for school and everything like that. So he told me a story about, they had an operation in my house. We have like multiple stories, and so it was like at the top floor, and it was great operation, everything. A little elbow joint, like a little PVC elbow joint, broke and flooded the whole third floor and drained the hydro table. And I think we were like away for the weekend or in the city or something, came back, it was all gone. So did everything right. A little piece of plastic broke, right? I mean, he says it all the time. It's kind of like a thing where it's like, the smallest details matter, right? And that's just out of your control, right? And unfortunately, what happens with small business owners, social equity applicants, etc., we can talk about this later, but predatory capital, right? And options to call and convert over to equity, right? You got one failed crop, the money's not coming in, all of a sudden you don't own your business anymore, right? So risk, these risks are very, very significant when getting in these kind of businesses.
I gotta go to processors because we spend a lot of time on cultivation. I will say one thing about cultivation. This is a huge opportunity for farmers upstate. They're super excited about this because they're the only ones who get to grow the weed that is consumed in New York City. And you think about the history of dairy up there and some of the vegetables they've been growing. It is a huge opportunity for them, and it's something that the state is prepared for. I think they got the organic farmers have been up there, secretly growing cannabis for a long time now, and I think that they're very excited about this opportunity. So I'm gonna quickly go over to processors because we got to get through a couple more. And I really just want people to understand what processing looks like. The permit is called processors, right? And this includes everything from a tabletop business where they're taking flour and turning it to oil for cookies, to like a pharmacy lab, approved lab that's doing like a supplement THC capsule. So processing, it runs the whole gamut of converting the flour, the dried flour that's grown, into a ton of different products. And I think a good way to start is if someone could walk us through the process of how flour is processed, and what does that room look like, what does the space look like, the equipment look like, to convert it into an oil and then into a final end product.
Yeah, I think me and Joe might have. I mean, you did ethanol.
Yeah, you did CO2.
CO2. So it might be some things might be similar, but with CO2, essentially, it's going to look like it's different. In hemp and cannabis, you process different parts of the cannabis plant. In hemp, you process everything. The crop is, at one point in 2019, it was like $40 a pound. It's more like $2 a pound now. But you know, a pound of weed is $2,000 to $4,000. So you don't want to process $4,000 worth of stuff in an extractor. So you really just take the scraps of the flower. It's really like whatever's left over that didn't make it into an eighth jar that's going to be sold in a dispensary. So you're taking this material, you're putting it into a large industrial grinder, and you're inputting it into a column. If you're doing CO2, kind of looks like that, and it applies pressure and CO2 throughout the system, and it creates a crude oil. It looks like peanut butter, and you have to undergo several more refinement processes to get it to a distillate or a full spectrum oil. And that full spectrum oil or a distillate, and you could, if we had pictures I'd show you, you could look up those terms online, but those are the raw ingredients that go into, you know, your cookies, your vape carts, all those products. It's going to be a full spectrum oil or a distillate, and a full spectrum oil just means it has pretty much everything in the plant still, minus the fats and lipids. And then the distillate, it's undergone more refinement, so it's usually higher concentration of THC. And that's the extraction process. And then getting into the production side is most processors in New York State are going to specialize in some sort of product, whether it's a tincture, a commercial kitchen. They're going to be making anything from, you know, baked goods to gummies to vape carts to
Lemonade,
tinctures.
drinks.
They're going to make products, and
Lemonade.
a processor should specialize in a finished good. I think it would be short-sighted to just get in there and do the extraction, because that's a commodity. And you can specialize and maybe build a brand around, you know, gummies or cookies or some sort of finished good that you can, you know, brand it and sell that to a dispensary. If you just focus on, you know, like Kaelan was saying before, just cultivating, it's going to get commoditized very quickly, and it's going to be hard for you to continue to get that spot on the shelf over time.
This is something that I think is, to bring it back to Harlem, you know, there's a big food and beverage scene here. There's a lot of chefs, there's a lot of people who know how to make good food, make good products, and there's going to be commercial kitchen space in Manhattan, in the Bronx. And so, you know, this license, there's a lot of room for entrepreneurial activity and coming up with your own brand and your own goods. I mean, do you think that this, go ahead.
Yeah, and just besides for commercial kitchens, just like manufacturing pre-rolls and eighth containers are going to be a huge thing. Those make up like 50 to 60% of what a dispensary sells, and those are not hard to get into. You don't even need machines to do those things. You know, they make tabletop units that make 100 pre-rolls, you know, per minute. So those are areas too that have low capital entry, and you could just
And
focus
they're
on.
buying from a cultivator,
They're buying from
bring
a
it to their
cultivator,
facility,
yeah.
and then they're rolling it or they're processing. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And it's easier. I've seen that throughout Massachusetts and other states, and it's a big portion of the dispensary's revenue, so it's always going to be needed. And a dispensary can't make that in New York State, which is not the case in other states. It's the only state where they're required to still go back to a processor for flower products.
But I think here they're going to allow you to own a cultivation and a processing license in this state. So you can get some economies by doing both. And there's some distillate over here, actually from Alan Gandelman's.
Oh, yeah.
To take a look at and see what it is. I think it's the short path distillation, so it's an extra step beyond the crude. At our farm, we did a different extraction method. It's super chill ethanol. So what you do, you take the trim bud, and we only use bud and flower. We don't use stem or anything like that because there's no CBD or cannabinoids in the stems, and unless you're making isolate, but the isolate's gone, it's a whole nother story. But so we just take the trim bud, and you want to get it the right size, maybe like the size of your thumb, because you're going to have to dip it and immerse it in alcohol, ethanol that's like minus 50 degrees centigrade or Fahrenheit or something like that. And then that pulls out all the cannabinoids in the oil off the plant, and you strain that out, and you have this crude oil left over. It's kind of different. I just said from the CO2, you can use a lot of the shake, is what he was talking about, like the stuff left over. With the ethanol, you need a good sized bud because it can't be too big, otherwise it won't absorb the alcohol, and it can't be too small, otherwise it just sits on top of it. So you gotta get the right size and soak it for a few hours and sift it off. But that's the processing. Ethanol is expensive now. When you're setting up an ethanol facility, even a CO2 facility, is fire hazard issues. Your local fire chief is going to bust your chops about it. So processing is also has some hazards to it, and some unforeseen costs as well.
I want to say one last thing about this processing is that if you are interested in getting into that, you can start experimenting right now. You can tabletop extraction with some oil on a stove. You can make cannabis products. I'm not recommending you use THC because that's illegal, but you could do CBD or whatever. But you can experiment. You can find the product that you would want to have ready for a legal market. And these processing license, the way I see them, they're going to be a lot of social equity applicants in that space as well. A lot of room for entrepreneurial activity.
You can do tinctures at home. I mean,
Yeah.
use Everclear or a corn liquor or something and do your own extractions. We were talking earlier because there's some hash over here. You take some buds and you shake it in with some dry ice, and the trichomes fall, the powder falls off, the trichomes fall off of the flower, and then the bottom of it you'll have either some keef, which is that's over there too, or hash, stuff for hash, bubble hash.
Bubble hash, yeah.
They call it.
Yeah, so you mentioned that the grow process was about 90 days, give or take 15 days. How about the processing? What's that time frame like to get bud to this distillate?
Yeah.
To get to that distillate, so the facility I built, we did white film distillation and CO2 extraction. So it would take us from receiving the flower, it would take us 3 days to get to about the full spectrum, the crude, and convert that into full spectrum oil. And then after that, it was just a matter of a few hours. You'd run it through a distillation machine. Once you have that full spectrum oil, the process is much quicker, and the reason being is the previous steps require time. So we had to freeze the material at a certain temperature. As John just described, he uses -50 ethanol, so they could skip some of those processes, so they might not have the same lead time, but that's an inherent issue with CO2 extraction. So 3 days from flower to full spectrum oil, and then maybe 1 day to distillate like the product you just saw.
I gotta power through the next few slides. Save that question for the end because we're gonna go like 30 minutes over. If you guys gotta go at 9, go at 9. But we're gonna end up going because we started late, and I want to get to everyone's questions. I know they got questions specific to what it is they're interested in, but we got to get through distributors and delivery and dispensaries. And so, big takeaway here. Distribution in New York State is going to be huge. You're talking about daily vans, trucks coming into Manhattan from upstate, carrying hundreds of pounds of cannabis flower every day. Another thing to think about in the way this is going to work, they can't go through Jersey, so they're going through Upper Manhattan. All the cannabis that comes into Manhattan, into New York City, is coming through the Bronx, is coming through Harlem, is coming through Washington Heights. So that's just how it's going to happen. It can't leave the state lines, and so big takeaways from the distributor's license and delivery. Could maybe talk a little bit about the difference between the two. How they're going to work. I mean, delivery is
So delivery is really at home, and you could be a dispensary and then also have delivery, or you could just be a delivery operation, right? So no storefront and just deliver to consumers. A distributor is really you're buying the product from a cultivator or a processor, you're taking possession of that product, you're warehousing it, and then you're selling it to a dispensary, right? So you're really the intermediate, intermediary. And so cultivators will be able to distribute their own products, but they will not be able to get a license to distribute other cultivators' products, right? So I think the distributor is a very interesting option. The compliance around both of those probably looks like, specially outfitted vans, like sprinter vans, maybe biometric locks. Your warehouse is going to have security cameras. You're going to have to back up all that footage, which actually is a really high cost, kind of unexpected cost for actually backing up 90 days worth of security footage. So there's a decent amount of compliance involved, but you could probably enter the distributor business, with a little bit maybe lower amounts of capital than say processing or cultivation, and then delivery too. But you will still need to maintain a fleet. You're going to have a warehouse and whatnot. Something I've always pushed back on for lawmakers is that delivery is the lowest barrier of entry, and that's where all the social equity entrepreneurs should be. I don't necessarily know if that's true, because I do think, like I said, that's going to be a decently high cost to comply.
Go ahead.
As you mentioned, I just want to jump in and say, I'm very big, obviously, into the ancillary market and how to get your foot in through the door, without actually touching the plant or having to even go for these licenses. So, anybody that's in the tech space, for example, or, the transportation space, think about what he just said, right? These infrastructures need to be built. They're not built by the people growing the plant. They're not built by the people that are selling this stuff. They're not going to go and figure out how to wire a security system that's going to be compliant for their warehouse to store their weed, their cannabis. It's just not going to happen. So as you guys hear everything that's going on, think about how, what's needed. During the gold rush, sure, if you found gold, you made money, but the shovels and the helmets were what needed. And that's really what I'm personally going to be pushing a lot. And so just keep that in mind, where as he's talking about it, how can you fit yourself into these roles without having to apply for a distribution license? If you own the fleet, you could rent out a fleet. If you own a tech company, you can set up everything that's needed. And I mean, even on the sense of branding, these people want to brand themselves. You know what I'm saying? They don't want just the unmarked vans and whatnot at some point or another. Think about how you can integrate yourself into these industries.
Or if you own property.
Yeah, property, real estate. That's a massive one. Yeah.
Quick question, guys. And thank you, man. You guys definitely know your game. Absolutely. So very appreciated. But in reference to these licenses, right? That we're talking. You just said real estate. So, from my understanding, or maybe we can all figure it out. You guys obviously have a lot of knowledge inside what's going on. If you want a dispensary, right, a retail license, or a consumption lounge, or a distributor, those three facets, right, going under the social equity piece, do they want you to own the building? Because if they do, then it's going to cut, it kind of gives the purpose, right, social equity, because we don't own those buildings, right, Manhattan, for $20 million. So from your understanding, is this going to be something that you want a dispensary, can you rent that property?
Yes.
Or consumption lounge, you can't?
We're gonna get to that. We're gonna get to that real soon. That question needs to be addressed on the dispensary side, and it's a huge conversation that we need to save for after this one. Well, again, just if you got distribution delivery questions, we're gonna come to that at the end. I want to save time, like at least 30 minutes to 40 minutes for everyone to ask questions. So ancillary businesses. Yeah, I mean, you started touching on this. Every element that exists in every other business is going to have opportunities here. That includes administrative, that's legal, accounting, financial, human resources, finding bud tenders, staffing these dispensaries.
One that's not on here too is building fixtures. Dispensaries are going to need to be designed, and they're going to need a lot of mill work and things like that. Security systems are very expensive. A 1,500 square foot dispensary could need 30 to 40 cameras. Security systems run at least $50,000 plus, and every single dispensary is going to need these. And also processing, production, and cultivation all need IT infrastructure and security systems. Is very
you have to check in to even be on the premises. Your name has to go into a system and be logged. Yep.
So these are really important, and they're required. So every business is going to be forced to search for somebody that can do these things. So these are definitely lucrative endeavors.
And that's something that obviously I've been hitting that note all day. So it's putting together a network, right? So similar to how this is, right? There's multiple business owners here without anybody having to make it obvious. We know this. And so you come up with a network, and we're going to have the opportunity as New Yorkers to work together, and we should be able to work together and say, hey, you're able to offer this aspect to this industry, and you can offer that aspect. So for example, I do printing, branding, and concept development, right? Well, I don't build the structures like he was mentioning, right? I don't do the tech. I can make you the design that's going to go on the projector, but I don't wire the projector. And so you come together with all the people that you need, and have a network to be able to then provide. Because if you're, and correct me if I'm wrong, you guys that are directly into the cannabis industry, if you're working with cannabis, you're working with cannabis. You're not working with plumbing.
You're not
working
mixing with other
HVAC.
business, yeah.
You're not working with printing. I mean, you know, Kaelan has an amazing brand. He didn't try and recreate his brand himself. He came, you know, to our firm, and he let us focus on that so that he can focus on developing a better product and how he's going to roll off that brand. You know, and that's where I came in. You know, that stress. They're already going to have to. A lot of people in the industry with these licenses are already going to have to be stressing about the constant changes in compliances and the constant changes, you know, to the industry and just honestly the pace that it's going to move as we're obviously moving to more towards, you know, more broad legalization, more states are legalizing. You know, federal has obviously been on the topic of conversation for a long time. They need people to help them get through all of that, and that's where, you know, people like us in the ancillary industry, you know, those that are looking to how to integrate themselves into it are gonna have that leg up, you know. And like I said, like we've been mentioning, New York is creative. New Yorkers are extremely creative. So if there's great innovations, great ideas coming out of places like Harlem, well, you know, make sure you take the proper steps to, you know, to reserve your proprietary knowledge and sell it. Sell it to these companies, to these distributors, to these dispensaries that are going to want to, you know, do this without having to worry about doing it. You know, so I'm big into the ancillary market. So
Huge opportunities there. I mean, could someone speak a little bit about, I got cash management up there, and I think that points to something pretty interesting about what we're about to see. Daily businesses that are moving cash around the city, because a lot of these operations, especially dispensaries, are going to be cash entirely. Those businesses don't exist right now? That's something that's going to be started because of cannabis.
Well, there's Brinks. I mean, there is
Brinks, yeah.
some of those.
And is Brinks going to be able to get into it to mix cannabis money with their actual business?
That's a good question. I mean, if their lenders decide to call their note because they're touching cannabis, no, I mean, maybe not. It might be too risky for them.
It's not the case in Massachusetts. Like people that's specialized in cannabis cash handling. It also brings up another good point: is if you do pursue that, we got to figure out what banks are actually going to bank cannabis people. You know, like in Massachusetts, there's only 3 banks that do that. And so cash handling is an interesting one. About it could be anywhere between 30 and 50% of a business's daily revenue is cash. So you got to deal with how do you get that from your location to the bank in a safe manner. And I think cash management is going to be a big thing for the first 3 years. In my opinion, I think it's going to skew down as credit card payments are allowed and things like that, because right now there's
crypto.
And crypto, there's other aspects, but right now it's like an ATM is in the location. You have to pay with cash in some places, but there's also workarounds that are kind of similar to Venmo or ACH payments. But that 50% is going to come down, I think, almost to 0 at some point. And we saw the number come down during COVID because they weren't even accepting cash during COVID. So it's going to be a market, but I just don't know the longevity of it, and I don't think it's here to stay forever.
All right, we're going to wrap up with dispensaries, and then we're going to open up to questions. I hope you guys saved your questions. If you guys are still in the live stream, please put your questions in the chat, because we're going to get to them in a second. So dispensaries, definitely want to dedicate a little time to talking about this. So Harlem, how many dispensaries might we expect eventually in Harlem? Manhattan, largely. That number at the bottom there, 1 dispensary per 10,000 people, that is the goal, I think, of a lot of people who are pushing legislators in Albany right now. That's what Colorado has, right? A dispensary for every 10,000.
I think there's a few states that have that, or it's just kind of naturally.
Yeah, so then you're looking at 11 to 12 dispensaries throughout Harlem. You're looking at maybe 15 in Washington Heights. You're looking at 130 dispensaries throughout Manhattan, 150. The average profit margins are pretty standard for a mature market, probably a lot bigger, you know, in the initial years here in New York.
For sure.
Yeah, definitely a lot higher margins. But these things, you know, make a ton of money. I mean, the average revenue for a dispensary in Denver is $5 million. And these are small spaces. And, you know, we really have to reimagine what they're going to look like in New York, because, you know, in a lot of other places, they build dispensaries all from the ground up because they have to be kind of uniquely designed or whatever. We're going to have to convert existing buildings, storefronts, into dispensaries. And that goes back to the ancillary about the opportunity there. But, you know, maybe you guys just briefly describe what do you think dispensaries are going to look like in a community like Harlem?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because you're going to need, well, you're going to want the support of the community. It's a municipality in upstate, and here it's a community board,
Yep.
right? So the municipal opinion is going to be very important on the application, so you want to engage your local community right off the bat, right? It's interesting, I sat on a call, a bunch of retailers throughout the country, and in these states that when they just start out, a lot of people put dispensaries like off the beaten path, right? Because that's where the municipality wants you to do it. But now, as cannabis is more like ubiquitous in places like Colorado, the saying is, if you wouldn't put a Wendy's there, don't put a dispensary there, right? So now all these independent shops that are off the beaten path, now they're having to pay like Weed Maps a lot of money to be listed up at the top. You know, Weed Maps is like a Yelp for cannabis, and so that's a consideration, right? Don't put a dispensary somewhere where you wouldn't be successful in a lot of other. If you don't think you would sell a lot of booze in a liquor store there, you don't put the dispensary there, because if you want to be long term, you want to be on the major foot traffic. I mean, I know, I guess in the city, there's foot traffic really everywhere, but still, there's still places that are more attractive from a retail perspective than others.
You market your location. You want your location.
Yeah, I mean, your location is everything, right? Especially because, the cannabis it's so easy to get cannabis in New York. Like, people aren't going to go way out of their way to go to a dispensary, right? And especially upstate, no one's going to drive 45 minutes an hour when they get their guy to bring it to them, right? And the same thing here too, right? Like, so there's a certain amount of inconvenience with buying cannabis, like, in the market now. So, you're going to balance that out. But yeah, I mean, you put it where people want to shop.
And it has to be by itself, stand alone. You can't, so it's not gonna be a Whole Foods.
No, it's got to be its own business, exactly, right? So
Can't do anything else on it. Can't sell anything else there but that.
Yeah, exactly.
I want to mention something real quick, gentlemen. That I leave soon. I'm Vladimir. I own a brand here in New York named Happy Monkey.
Yeah.
And what I want to mention is just because you guys haven't mentioned it there, just so people know they have this option. Like, what your opinion is? First of all, I want to say this is so good to be coming to this up here instead of going to the canna gatherers and all that stuff that doesn't represent our community. So I'm Harlem, so I'm in my business to be here because it's so important. I want to thank you guys for doing this. So I want to say was that there's another option, like, for people that maybe don't want to go into licensing at all, like licensing and manufacturing. Like, if you have a brand and you just want to do a licensing manufacturing deal and just want to put your product on the shelves, and you do a contract with somebody similar to you guys, and you do a contract with a dispensary just to be on the shelves, because branding is going to play a major role here.
Yep.
And if your brand is powerful enough, you could just do that too without having any other overhead. So I want to know what your opinion
I mean, that's amazing input, because that brands are going to control everything, and you have all the power, right? And so now too, I mean, you might even be able to not just license your brand, but also get a piece of the action off what's being sold, right? And so that, I think there's huge opportunities there, because especially the ROs are going to be, they might be the first people selling. They want customers. They need customers. They don't understand the customer. And so if you do, and you have a brand that really speaks to whatever demographic you're going after, you hold all the power, right? So absolutely, I think licensing deals and negotiations, and hopefully the state doesn't make regulations a barrier. But, I haven't had a chance to meet you personally, but I'm a big fan of your brand. I had a chance to go, tap among myself. But I mean, it's great that you're here. And so
I'm happy you're here because I'm from Harlem originally, and it's just, after, I've been in the legacy market for 22 years, have been for 4 years, been to every conference that's ever been done in New York, first time in Harlem, north of 96th Street. It's so amazing. I want to thank you for coming over here to tell the people that, they matter and they're valued, because we had to go down there to really make an impact, even though we're from here.
Well, I mean, to speak to influence, they're talking about your name and your brand in the governor's mansion and the governor's office. They're talking about all the lawmakers talking about Happy Monkey, and so I mean and you know what?
Well, you can find them at Happy Monkey up there.
Yeah, exactly, right. but it's a word that's a big distinction. I've been saying this for years. Entrepreneurs. Not criminals, entrepreneurs. That's what they are. They've been that for years, and they're ready to go. And so, thank you for, being out there too, because it takes a lot to be out there. Trust me, I know. Like, you know, I didn't have a lot on the line to be out there myself, but you know, like my father and other people involved, it takes a lot to be out there, because I mean, they've been persecuting people for decades and decades, and they still are. They still are. Destroying lives and families and communities, man.
So based on your point, Vlad, if you go back to the distribution license, if you want to do that, the one way to be successful there is you find the best brands and you become you find the happy monkeys everywhere and you lock them up in a deal, and every dispensary will come to you because you have the best brands, and a dispensary will be successful, as you know, because you'll find the best brands and you rotate them out and you find the new product and you keep your shelf fresh. I think that's how you be successful at dispensary. One of the things, everybody gravitates toward dispensaries, and locations are extremely important. I've spent a lot of time in a few of them, especially in the Berkshires. The dispensary game is got to be tight, because it's really about creating experiences. Because as Kaelan said, you can get weed anywhere from your favorite guy or a new dispensary. So why would I even come to you? Yeah, I have the best brands, number one, but I like going there because the people know stuff, it feels comfortable. And I've been in dispensaries now. I mean, dispensary game is hot. I mean, your stuff, you just got to create some experience.
You got to have like knowledgeable people, staff there.
It's got to look, the lights, I mean, the wood paneling.
Everything.
Everything.
You got one shot to make an experience for someone, or they're just going to go to the next dispensary.
Yep.
The one thing on the brands that you brought up, I think it's a great point. Because of the complexity and the regulation around the cannabis side, there are like a few extra hurdles that you have to maneuver. Like in the hemp industry, you could build a brand, co-pack it at another facility and sell that. But because of a lot of the red tape that's created with the licensing, there's a lot more barriers. So for instance, things that are happening in Massachusetts from out-of-state brands is like, they have a brand, bring it to Massachusetts, they don't manufacture it in Massachusetts, they have somebody else in the state of Massachusetts do it, they sell them the packaging, or they have some sort of royalty agreement with them, but they can't physically sell it because they don't have a license to sell it. So I think brands are one of the best things to be in, because one, you don't need a license to get involved with that. When you look at all the MSOs, most of the brands they have, they never created. They acquired it from entrepreneurs, and they tapped into something and they just acquired that. So building a brand, I think, has the least amount of capital risk to do, and has some of the most exponential upside and growth, because you can take, that's not a physical place, you can take that to any state. It doesn't have to just stay in here. If you build something up from the ground up in New York, where a lot of things dictate that, and you can just bring it to other states. You know, a dispensary you can't do that, and cultivation you can't do that.
You just remind real quickly, and that's something, we're going back to Harlem and the Bronx, the Black and Latino, that's something we know how to do really well. Yeah. This industry will not take off until this community gets a hold of a brand. And I mean, you think of the Hennessy's and the Cristal, I mean, all that stuff flew off the shelf when Black and brown people took it, put a little flavor in it, and that's it. So the branding thing, it's a good point to bring up. That's a key. It's a key element. That goes back to story.
Yeah.
What story are you trying to tell? What are you trying to convey?
Harlem has that story.
An intent. What's your
And
intent?
what's your intent? Yeah.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. I feel that I'm very astute, because I've been looking at this game, or this opportunity, or the last frontier, whichever way you say for yourself. I've been a businesswoman, I've been around, I have people in California, I'm from the islands, you know, my family has a house, they used to grow, you know, I was wondering what they were doing. But to me, when we get into this game, as far as branding and what you just said, it's gonna be totally different. Totally different. And, you know, one of the things about, I mean, it's not about politics, but I hope that there will be more growers. I mean, I know about Woodstock, I'm pretty up in age, I didn't go to the first one, but the second one. And I found that upstate and in New York, they always vote against our interests here. They vote against our interests. And I understand growing is really hard. A lot of growers, you know, got arrested or in jail, you know, way back when. But I'm hoping that minorities here in Harlem, in the Bronx, the 5 boroughs, we do grow, because if I'm opening a dispensary, besides quality, I want to buy from my people. And I don't mean that in any other way, but I want to generate that money going around. Because I understand how a lot of upstate people feel about me. They voted against my best interests for my child, my community, people in this room. But we all have to make money. I understand that. But I just hope we saw, I understand everything you're saying, that we have growers here. Because I'm gonna buy from a grower in the 5 boroughs, in the Bronx.
No, that's a great point. And on these brands and stuff, you gotta understand you hold the power, right? That is where that you're gonna drive in. There's so many predators out there. I've dealt with so many CEOs and whatnot, been in enough lawsuits myself that they're going to try to take advantage of everything you can build and the consumers that you can connect with and everything. And so it's very important that the ownership of the business lies in with the people that are creating the ideas. I would say upstate, the city of Binghamton is blue as fuck, right? Outside of Binghamton is tough, right? You get to the sticks real quick. So, there's a lot of parts of upstate, right, is not necessarily, what you might think. But I certainly, get where you're coming from.
We are going to open up the questions now. We got 30, as long as you guys got questions, we got time to answer them. So let's start here.
So thank you all for sharing. I really, really appreciate you all coming to Harlem. This is like my first in-person event discussing this topic. And thank you for being so candid and open about your experiences. I was curious to find out, with all of your expertise in this area, how did you go about building your teams? And another question, so how did you build your team to actually pursue these endeavors or these interests? And the second question I have, definitely talked about the challenging and growing and processing. I'm more curious about what area you find most rewarding, and I'll ask that other question later. So, how did you grow your teams, and what area do you find the most rewarding?
So I guess I'll start from the
Can I just say just like a minute each so we can get as many questions as possible?
So from the ancillary point of view, I work actually with my partner, actually. His name is Stephen Fan. So anybody that's familiar with CBD in this state, Come Back Daily is our store. So we had a lot of stores prior to the pandemic, and we just knock it down just to make sure that we're actually doing good. But anyways, Steve was a client of mine on one of my other businesses, and we were able to connect because I'm not a drinker, he's allergic to alcohol, and so we smoked. And like many great relationships, we bonded. And so from there, I was able to then start kind of learning his strengths and weaknesses and so on and so forth, him learning mine. And from there, I learned that he's a great operational person, and that's something that I used to do myself. And then, I was able to now take a step back and focus on the creatives. And so from there, then we said, all right, well, what do we need help with, right? And so, we started sourcing and saying, who's interested in this industry, who's passionate about this industry, but most importantly, in conjunction, who's passionate about the specific thing that we need within this industry. So, for example, we started going out and our social media person, right? She's a daily cannabis user, and she's very passionate about the pictures and the way things look, and just the voice of a brand. And so we were able to bring her on, and it's just really just having conversations, and really it came from just networking and bonding and knowing, hey, if you're able to offer this and you want to get in on this, let's have the conversation. Let's see how we can benefit each other, and then you just kind of build like that off of trust. Because at the end of the day, this is going to be an industry that trust is going to be a very valuable thing. Obviously, like in other aspects, but we're talking cannabis. So you definitely have to trust. You don't buy from somebody that you don't trust. So even in the ancillary market, they're going to be very skeptical on who they work with. And I'm sure he wouldn't work with me if I came off sketchy. And so you want to make sure that you build the team solid around you based on the people that you trust and relationships you make.
Yeah, and so I think also, for me, I built my team around, obviously my father, and then the guy, Aldous, who grows with them, who's like an uncle to me. But the fourth member of my team, my number 2, the guy who really runs my business. So one of my best friends growing up, his name was Aman. He was always smartest guy, in school. He was also like best football player, everything, right? He got a full ride offer to Yale. And so he came down and worked Wall Street. And you know, I knew that to take my business to the next level, I really need someone who really understood finance and building business models and stuff. So I asked him to leave a six-figure job to come work for me and you know, and be my business, be my partner. And he did, and you know, ever since then, you know, we live together and everything. You know, you met him. I mean, he runs the business, and so he doesn't smoke though. He doesn't really know cannabis much, but he brings a level of understanding and skill and knowledge that, you know, no one outside, you know, knew could, right? So I think there, and then also I think really important to look to build your team. You know, look at the people who have been around cannabis a while and have been, you know, moving product and selling, and you know, get this, like with this word criminal, out of your mind and think entrepreneur, right? They have a lot of entrepreneurial skills. Yeah, they may not know how to file, you know, their quarterly sales tax, but that's pretty easy to, you know, figure out, and you can bring an accountant and all that kind of stuff. So look at the community, you know, what we call the legacy market, the informal marketplace, and don't be, you know, scared by that. I mean, they might not have the you know, mannerisms that you think you might need in a boardroom, but listen, if they know how to, you know, sell cannabis and they really understand the consumer, that's going to make you a heck of a lot more money.
Yeah.
Yeah, for our project, like what me and my partners, like how we came together is each of us kind of had different skill sets originally. One person had a background in agriculture. I had a background in like software and B2B sales and a little bit of business experience, and one had a hospitality background. That was the first project. For the cannabis stuff now that I do, it's, you know, I do this with a few of my friends from college. Each of us have different backgrounds. We got someone with a law background, we got someone with B2B background, someone with cannabis knowledge. And the things that work well for us is that, you know, we have good communication. We need to be able to communicate because problems pop up in a venture all the time, especially in a startup. And things seem to be going terribly for a period of time, and then you have a peak and then it goes back down, and you have to be able to communicate through those really stressful times because that could really damage a team's ability to operate going forward. I find teammates that are driven, like they're constantly wanting to like put in more hours, regardless of what it is, myself included. If you surround yourself with people that are hungry and that want to win, like that just amps the whole group up, and you can continue to keep pushing for the next part in the business. And then the last thing is trust. I think trusting your teammates that, you know, if you can't come through for whatever reason, whether it's family, friends, health, things pop up, you need to be able to trust and rely on the people that you work with, that they're going to be able to get your back and, you know, make sure that you can push forward with the business. Because if you can't trust your teammates on a day-to-day basis, I don't know how you expect to have a long-term business. And so those are, you know, the attributes that me and my partners kind of all collaborate with at this point.
I'll just say real quickly, my same experience as these three gentlemen, but if you are going to go for a license, your team has to evidence a diversity of skill sets and experience, because that'll enhance your ability to get over the hump, because they don't want somebody who ran a fish store and then they just want to sell cannabis. And I mean, it probably could do it, but you know,
Fishing cannabis.
yeah. Actually, I do that. My partner's a fish guy, and we use the waste from the fish farm to fertilize the cannabis.
Hey, that's pretty cool.
It's
There you
a
go.
closed loop regenerative thing.
That's awesome.
But that's a little bizarre. But your team's got to be diverse. It's almost like any other business. You need somebody who can fill the different needs. But going for a license, your team has got to be diverse as far as skill sets goes, and maybe even just gender, race, and the whole thing.
I will add one other thing that you mentioned. I had a problem in a previous business where I like to micromanage, and I learned the hard way. Like, that sucks. Like, you cannot do that. And so I've been able to, luckily I'm no longer like that, but find a team that you can build around that is receptive to how you delegate, and also know that you're not a boss, you're a leader, right? And so your team should be a team of people that you can trust, obviously, and then communicate with efficiently to be able to delegate everybody in the right path for everybody's common goal. So that's definitely something to know as well.
Questions? Any other questions? Specific questions?
So, with the regulation, will it require like the ROs, the big fish, to engage with the micro businesses, or with the 50% license holders who are, I assume, like minority minority business owners?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it kind of gets into the rules and regs a little bit. But yes, the ROs are going to have a lot of pressure on them to do a lot of lifting and a lot of assistance to the micro business operators. I don't know if you guys can speak to that, but
Yeah, I mean, the thing is with the ROs, they all want to put forward the fact that they are, invested in social equity, right? And so, in a certain extent, as a social equity business, you could probably take advantage of that, right? And get your product on the shelf there, right? But at the end of the day, the only thing the ROs are looking out for is their shareholders. It's the only thing that they're looking out for, and they have fiduciary interest to do so. So, they're also going to be diversity and hiring targets. For me, I really see that as, they're gonna say, okay, let's hire just a bunch of people of color to be bud tenders or to trim, so that doesn't really, impress me much in terms of that kind of, diversity and inclusion plan that they're gonna have to submit to the state. They're gonna have some law firm write a very, one that looks great.
it's going to be pretty, it's going to be real pretty.
Sure, yeah.
So Governor Cuomo hasn't issued like a mandate, because I'm in the infrastructure industry, and there's a mandate like 30% of this has to go to MWBEs. So I'm
That's not there yet.
That's
It's
not
just,
there.
the language I think is pretty loose, but it's
Yeah.
like they have to have social equity platforms, strategies, they have to have real.
They have a social equity plan, and that gets
Yeah.
reviewed every 2 years when they renew
Okay,
the
there you
license. Yeah.
Like in Massachusetts, you have to have a host community agreement, a social equity plan, and a diversity plan. I think New York's following something similar, but is not much specifics on the framework of that.
I will say that there's innovative ways to do these plans that don't involve just hiring people.
Yeah.
There's real equity you can build in communities through partnerships, and if they're not doing that, there's a reason for it. Because there's a lot of money to be made, and there's absolutely no reason to just have an equity plan that is like, well, we hired people from this neighborhood. No,
Or donated money
Yeah.
that they're gonna write off on their taxes.
Yeah.
They should be using all black electricians or plumbers or
HVAC.
nurseries or
Exactly.
HVAC. That's another way. Vendor relationships is another way to fulfill your diversity initiatives. And I think they're quick and easy, but there's a whole bunch of reasons why that doesn't happen, because we don't know any black plumbers, black electricians. Actually, there's a diminishing amount of black plumbers. But
We're sure where they are.
yeah, well, there you go. So you can really find it if you have to. But there is no MWBE utilization set yet within the rules, and it should be. And then the last thing though, all is not lost, because you can buy the brand that you want to buy. You don't have to buy the RO stuff. You're gonna go look for the brand you want to meet your goals, the experience that you want. So there's ways to get the big guys to move on that.
They need us a lot more than we don't need them at all, but they do. They
Right.
need this. They need people in the city.
Yeah, well, right here.
I'm raising my hand. I like what, the possibility, but I need to know, what is the percentage of blacks in this industry right now in New York? How many of us?
The legal market?
I would hope, we're all here business people, so that's kind of like an insult to me. I'm a businesswoman, so I need to know the percentage of how many.
Well, yeah, there is no legal market yet.
Excuse me?
There is no legal market yet. The hemp industry?
You mean that there are no stores? There's
Oh,
no,
the medical cannabis?
there's, anywhere we can get it.
Yeah.
What is the percentage? Legally.
Maybe 1, 2, 3.
Yeah. No, it's just CBD and the medical cannabis side, and so that is,
And you know what?
there's no diversity there.
Right, and I haven't heard the encouragement to, this is what needs to be done and stuff like that. To me, I came all the way here to hear some information, and all I hear is there's a percentage of certain people making a whole lot of money, and we're making zero.
So there isn't, what we've been talking about here, there's not any money being made in this right now. This has not happened yet. This is,
I'm talking because apparently everybody on the panel has said how much they've done, and this and that and the other. And the gentleman started off by saying that he made money with the, well, whatever that was that he got himself involved in. The gentleman next to him said that he started off in college with his college friends. He's a legacy, or, you know, he's born into the business. This gentleman here is the only one that I can relate to on this end, because to me, he's kept it 100.
Yeah, we're talking about, that's hemp, that's CBD. That is a very white dominant, it's very little diversity in the CBD market in New York. It is entirely dominated by upstate farmers. It's not, that's totally true. What we're talking about here is the legal cannabis market that is yet to be established, where there is an opportunity to diversify it, and that's.
So we should stop talking about the other because it's dominated.
To be honest, the CBD market is dead. There's no money to be made in that market. I wouldn't even recommend anyone in Harlem try to get into the CBD market.
I do the CBD.
You did CBD.
So I think I know. I think I have an understanding of where you're leading with it, right? And a lot, like he mentioned, a lot of what's being spoken about right now hasn't happened yet. So there's no statistics, there's no data, there's no way of knowing who is who. Yes, we have an assumption, a fair assumption of right now who is most poised to be able to actually be able to do it. And you know, we all know this, right? But like myself, I didn't have the funds at one point to be able to start, getting into the cannabis industry, and so I got my foot in through the door. And I think that the opportunity for people of colors, blacks, Latinos, and so on and so forth, is to take what you know that you're able to offer. And it's obvious. If you cook, if you have a restaurant, if you make drinks, if you have a bar, you already know that all of that stuff can be infused. Start thinking about the ideas of how to actually integrate that, right? Because then you have a processor, or let's say the ROs, right? I would like to, and maybe I'm wrong on this, but an RO, I look at them like a company like McDonald's, right? They're going to be the exact same thing no matter where you go. I have my medical license here, and I go to Columbia Care. I went once. I'm sorry, if anybody here works for Columbia Care, I hate it. I don't like it. It's boring. But then I just landed from Chicago this morning, and in Chicago they have beautiful dispensaries that are very like they have artwork on it from local Black and Spanish, Black and Latino people, right? And so that's the kind of dispensary that I like going to. And then there was another one, Sunnyside, that theirs was very generic. It was just orange and white walls, right? And then I went to another one, MoMA, and they had, fixtures from different local artists. So I think that the best way to be able to, for us to integrate is think about what we're doing already. And Harlem, for example, is a Renaissance location. As much as people may not like New Yorkers, because we come out strong and whatnot, this is where people still want to be. The ideas that come out of here are what people want. And so even down to the ROs, Hennessy, they did a campaign to work with people, with local artists, right, for their bottles. So be that local artist. They still make their money, they still do their thing, but we just need to do a better job of working together and putting all of our, talents and skill sets out there and network, like I was mentioning earlier. This right here, everybody should connect. Grab each other's information. Who does this? Who does that? Who does this? Who does that? And then take that and then go to the big companies and be like, hey, you're not going to be able to sell here a lot because we're the ones that have the ideas. You may have the money and the infrastructure, but we have ideas and we want to buy from ours. And that's why, like, for example, I called mine Bodega because I grew up going to the Bodega in the corner. So if you want print, you want branding, go to the Bodega. That's not a shameless plug. But but you know what I'm saying? Like, go to the Bodega. There you go. That's your local way of getting into it, and so I hopefully that kind of a little bit answered your question, but it's just, it's still, yeah. Thank you.
I said I get you before, so please, right here. Yep.
My question is about the cooperative license. You said earlier that that's probably a higher threshold to get for the kids to buy into. But have you seen across the country instances that maybe areas in New York City could model after that would be beneficial to look at? And do you see cooperative licenses as something that's really viable in New York City area?
My understanding of the cooperative license is that they put it in the legislation so in case things go a certain way in the market as it develops in New York, they'll introduce cooperatives to protect certain communities. So like cooperatives are there to protect small farmers in a lot of ways, small growers. If there is a situation where there's some exploitation on the dispensary, if there's something that's not lining up correctly, the cooperative model, I think, comes in as a way of leveling playing fields and making it easier for smaller growers. I think when we were talking about it earlier, they said that it just might not be the first thing they roll out, because there is, I don't know, I definitely, it doesn't exist in other states.
No.
No, if New York's the first to do the
Would it
cooperative.
only be cooperative growing, or would it be like the cooperative retail or like other?
It'll be fully integrated.
Yeah, and I don't
Everything,
think
yeah.
you won't be able to do retail.
No.
Grow, process, and
Grow,
distribute.
process, and distribute, but you won't be able to do retail. And Damian's right. I think it was Andy. I worked with Andy Novick, the Small Farmers Association.
Small farm.
She pushed that because it protects small farmers who can, quite frankly, just get swamped by this whole thing. And maybe they can band together, get a facility upstate somewhere, or even in New York, or Hunts Point or something like that. And then that's a bazaar where they have different strains and grows, and they can package it, and you go there, just like you go get your fish from Hunts Point Market, and that's how they survive. So small farmers able to come together and get some economies.
Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay, sir, right back there.
Yeah, so my name is Adrian Ennis. I'm from YMXL. Our website is ymxl.work. That is the shameless plug. But my question while I was here, I really want to understand how to break into the distribution and the delivery side. My company is a logistics company. I'm the chief of partnership, and we're looking to see how we can partner with, from farm to dispensary, from dispensary to client. But then all the people here that have ancillary business, as you mentioned before, we want to see how we can help get your product to the destination that you want to get it to without you having to worry about the logistics side. So I do see that there's different breakdowns, and want to see if we can get both those licenses and what it looks like. We've been online scouring, trying to see how we can, prepare ourselves now for this industry before it is, it is ready. But I'm just trying to get some insight on how we can break in on transportation.
Great question. So what you have a distribution delivery business. What can I do now to start preparing logistics to prepare for what's coming as far as the distribution purpose here?
I would start networking with hemp farmers and processors. That might be a good person to talk to. I'm not sure what the application is going to look like, but sometimes when previously in the hemp license, if you had any type of business relationships you could write down on the application, that might make it more attractive to the regulators. So networking with pre-existing hemp farmers, those guys might be converting over to THC, and just like the processors might convert over to THC also.
Yes, I would look at more so what the territory you want to cover and how far you want to. So most distributors in the alcohol business they have territories, right? Because it's very difficult to deliver from here to Niagara Falls, right? So I would look at how wide you want your reaches for dispensaries, and think about windshield time, and because you're going to have a central point, right, from a logistics perspective. So how far out you really want to be, and then really start networking. I mean, there's going to be hemp farmers who are going to be growing cannabis, but I think there's going to be a lot of growers in cannabis and a lot of manufacturers and processors. So I think be engaging, networking events, and always try to meet new people there. But also looking at it from a capital perspective in terms of what kind of vehicles you're going to need, how many stores you want to service. It means how much inventory you really want to buy up front, and then really being out there, because the first thing a processor and a grower is going to ask is who I'm going to sell my product to, and it's going to be a distributor.
Yeah, and there's going to be a cap on vehicles too. So you're probably going to be limited to maybe three or four vehicles, and that's to keep. Yeah, that's to keep Uber coming in and just wiping and Amazon wiping everybody
And those
out.
are the things that they get rid of those after 3 to 5 years. But that first 3 years, there's that cap to keep it small business friendly.
Yeah, and also focus on technology and your IT. Everything's gone like headless, they call it. So how easy is it to order from you or engage with your business? So have a really tight IT system. There are lots of companies now plowing into this space. The Lanterns and the Dutchies and Leafly. I mean, they'll start finding a way into distribution because they already do distribution online, aggregating product and so forth. So I would go into the IT space as well.
I also just want to quickly plug delivery dispensaries in Harlem will be able to deliver to any customer in the city. So you will not, dispensaries here won't just be limited to the customers in Harlem. If you have good product and people like your brand, they can order from you online, they can call, you can.
My question to that point is, the dispensaries themselves will not be able to transport without someone who has that transport license, correct? Am I correct?
The dispensaries could get
Dispensaries
that
could do
transport permit because it's not really a license.
Oh, they can get that permit
So
by
yeah,
themselves.
dispensaries can do their own delivery, just like a restaurant can do their own delivery, but they're probably going to look at like third party.
Yeah, they wouldn't want to.
And that's what we want to do. So
Yeah.
I'm just trying to understand
Yeah.
if that market will be, you know, available.
Yeah.
We're looking at New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, the tri-state, you know, and so we looked at Jersey and how it can be implemented. That's where I'm originally from. My team's from Brooklyn, so we get New York as well. We get New York as well. Got to represent Jersey still, but I'm looking at it from the standpoint how we can do this within the tri-state. We understand we can't cross the border just yet, but we want to be ready for when that does happen as well.
Thank you.
Sir.
Question right here.
Yes, okay. My name is Mr. Terrence David, and I'm an old school planter. Now, I appreciate the panel to come to this platform and give us these great ideas. One thing I don't hear about land. The upstate farmers then have that advantage, land. We who live in the city, we don't have no access to land. Now, even the gentleman speak that he used to plant outdoor and he prefer indoor. How those commercial places very expensive, so how are we gonna get the food in?
Yeah, you know, earlier I was talking about there's gonna have to be some commitment on behalf of the state, on behalf of the big cannabis companies that are coming in to build growing facilities in the city so people can learn how to grow and be, you know, scale businesses that can move outside of the city. That's personally what I'm working on in the Bronx. What I want to do is a workforce development project that teaches people how to grow so they can scale businesses outside of the city. That is going to be challenged. I don't know if you've looked at real estate prices in the South Bronx, but there are places in upstate New York where it's, you know, you could rent a 30,000 square foot facility for $2,000 a month. Like, it's night and day. And so that's just a geographic economic problem that we're not going to figure out anytime soon. There's just so much demand for warehouse space around the city from people like Amazon, Fresh Direct, whatever, like the delivery service. Growing is just going to happen outside the city. It's going to. There's going to have to be programs that funnel people interested in growing in the city up out of state. They're not going to be simple. You know, I don't really know what else to say.
Also money, I mean capital. The state needs to provide the first amount of capital into a business through grants, or else, you know, how can you compete with, you know, a private equity firm that can, you know, place cash into their business, right? Because you can't go and get a small business loan. Because if the loan is backed by the SBA, they will not write you it, right? And so what's key for someone such as yourself with the experience, the ability, you could do a commercial grow, probably, you know, you had the capital and resources in the land, like you said, you could, you know, do it tomorrow, right? So that's going to be very important, is that not only is that money available, but that money actually gets in the hands of entrepreneurs like, you know, such as yourself, because at that point then you can make a decision on where you want to, you know, base your business, right? Because, you know, as you said, you know, the real estate prices here are much more expensive than, you know, in like Binghamton, I mean, it's like $15 a square foot, you know, triple net for like warehouse and commercial space, right? So it's the barrier to entry for people who live in the city is much higher, and you got to reduce that barrier by making sure that, you know, the ROs pay their fair share and that, you know, money goes out, because, you know, once you have a business, you have all the leverage when you go to raise capital and raise debt, because you have cash flows and you can project that out. So.
How much did it cost for you to open your dispensary? And on the application, did you use a lawyer? How much did the lawyer cost? And would you be willing to take me to your farm if I could see what's going on?
Yeah, of course. I'd love to invite everybody actually here up to the dispensary when it opens. Like, it's being built right now, so we're about 3 months away from opening. And so afterwards, we're gonna like swap information. Love to have anybody here up to the dispensary for a tour. So the town that I'm in is in Western Massachusetts. It's a smaller town in comparison to like Boston or things like that. You know, my dispensary, I'm not gonna get into exact ranges, but it's north of 500,000, but less than $1 million. We went a little bit more over the top with our interior design. I think we touched on it earlier about the experience aspect. There's definitely lots of dispensaries that have done it for lower than that, but we put in a little bit more capital to change the interior.
And the lawyer?
The lawyer side, so I came into the project later on. I wasn't involved with the actual licensing process. Two of my other partners handled that. From my what we had was just one of our partners' friends was a lawyer, and she did it pro bono and to get paid back once the store was up and running. So that might be.
I've been pricing them. They want 60, 70,000 to fill up an application, and they said for a micro business, they want $10 million.
Anyone talking to you about cash right now,
You need
the rules aren't
buildings,
out.
you need to put exits for people to get out. You need just the way you have to construct it in order to fit these credentials that the fire department's gonna want, whatever else departments want is gonna cost so much money. All these lawyers keep telling me. You think that that's true?
They have 10 million is a number for a grow facility, not for a dispensary.
No, micro, they were telling me. Like if I want to apply for the micro business, being that you're growing, processing, all that at once, you need lights, you need to know how to grow.
You could do that.
That seems.
So a lot of these are all tea leaf reading, right? So the lawyers, they read the tea and then they charge a lot of money for their time, right? So for instance, for us, most businesses that come to us and ask us to write an application for them, we start at $30,000 and go to $50,000, and we're still cheaper than a lot of law firms. But anyone in this room, reach out to me. Our advice, we do more than half our clients, we do not charge $1 to. So happy to give any sort of advice. We aggregate this information, hire very, good teams of experts. We're small, we're not a massive law firm, but we know our shit, right? So happy to help out there and do, applications, at whatever you can afford. Like I said, we can make money off people who can afford it. So that way we can offer people who just need the opportunity, because at the end of the day, entrepreneurs, you just be empowered, you can go make a lot of money. A dispensary is a 7-figure business off the bat, right? Grow, stuff like that. Micro business is gonna be smaller, it's definitely not gonna cost $10 million. We also have resources to help you with, financial planning and modeling and, trying to get capital in that's not predatory. We've seen a lot of deals and we've, connected with a lot of people who've seen a lot of deals, so happy to help.
All right. Can I jump into this discussion for a moment? Because it's extremely frustrating. Okay, so you talked about how innovative. Okay. So there was a discussion about how innovative this legislation is, but no money has been allocated to provide the types of assistance that we need. No money has been allocated. So the way this legislation has been written, it has been written such that the MSOs can come in and monopolize this industry, and then the revenues that they derive from us, because that's what we consider consumers. I also have another name for it, prey. Prey. So we purchase from these MSOs, helping them to generate revenues, and then a portion of those revenues, whatever, the profit, the profit or the revenues, goes into this reinvestment fund. A year, 2 years down the road. And that money is gonna go to the police, the New York State institutions for research. Some of it is going to go towards education, and then drug treatment, mental health, programs. And then a few dollars may trickle down to entrepreneurs, because frankly, this isn't about you becoming thriving entrepreneurs. The legislation isn't written for that. It's for you to consume and make other people wealthy. So that's the fact, and that's the truth of the matter. So when we talk about the licenses and the micro licenses, what are we talking about? Peanuts. Or as Ray McGuire said, crumbs. So let's be clear about what your role is in this industry and why we need to fight to make certain that it doesn't go down like that. So I'm glad that they have come here today to give you a picture of what is entailed. The platform that we put together and that we presented to the state and to all of our legislators was that community-based organizations with deep ties to these communities that have been in this space for decades should be funded right out the gate, day one, to provide services to you, education, you know, the compliance aspect, how to create a business, how to get these licenses. These are all the things that we say should be done day one. That you, once you open up your business, should have the opportunity to operate and run your business for a 3 to 5 year period without having to compete with these cannabis companies. That wasn't considered. So when we talk about, again, social equity, let's talk about the economic component of that. The criminal justice aspect, that was great. No doubt. People who have been incarcerated for minor crimes, nonviolent crimes, petty marijuana busts, should absolutely have their records expunged. Absolutely. No doubt about it. We were with that 100%. We live with these people. They're our family. They're our neighbors. They're our friends. But we're talking about them and us who live in these communities and have been subjected to all kinds of criminality by the government. Should be able to get into this business big time and thrive. How are we going to create generational wealth if we just get some shelf space in a dispensary? That's not enough. Those are crumbs. So let's talk truth to power. We have not been well represented. This legislation does not serve us. It does not benefit us. There are land trusts in New York State. Has there been a discussion about really giving some of this land at low to no dollars to black farmers who we know across this country have been robbed of their land, not provided with financing? There's been no discussion about black farmers and what should happen in this state. So we have an association here that really needs to bump up their black membership tremendously and put some black people on the board, because if we're going to be working with upstate, which makes a lot of sense, we need to be in the game. And we shouldn't be limited to one license here and there. We have some black people and some Latino people, the ones who are harmed, not the ones who weren't harmed, who will be able to pull together the financing to do seed to sale. So why don't we have opportunities to get some of that and to prosper in that area? Why can't we get some of these medical licenses? We have black pharmacists. Why can't they sell medical marijuana in our communities? We know them, we trust them. We want to go to their stores and purchase these types of products from them. So what we've been talking about here at HBA, we said is very important for people who have been most harmed to benefit the most from the legalization of cannabis. And so thank you very much, gentlemen. I think that it's been a great session. Thank you to everyone who has come here tonight and everyone who's tuned in on Facebook. We're going to also put it up on YouTube. We have to let people know that we cannot be bamboozled again.